If your drawing looks like one of the first two examples, for the next exercise, try to use outlines more like in the third or fourth examples. And that exercise will add another challenge. It will be your first blind drawing. As we said in the guidelines, blind drawing isn't literally drawing blind, like with your eyes closed. It actually requires very close observation, but focused only on the subject you're drawing without looking at your paper at all. To start, you'll set your pencil point down on the paper, look at your subject, and draw without looking at the paper again until we say stop. This might be really hard at first. Your instincts may keep telling you to take a peek and just check how things look, but resist that urge. Just try to relax and trust your drawing hand to follow your eye. If you do, you'll enjoy yourself more and might even find the process liberating since you don't have to worry about the results. Your drawings will probably look funny no matter what. But the point of this exercise isn't just to help you relax and enjoy drawing, important as that is. Its real purpose is to sharpen your observational skills by letting you spend all your time looking at your subject. Now do a second drawing, this time not drawing the chair or stool at all, just the spaces in between the parts. This exercise is easier to do when you start with inside spaces, drawing one and then the next and so on until all the inside spaces are drawn, waiting to draw the outside shape, that is the shape around the whole chair, last. This exercise teaches you to sketch the way your eyes take things in. Try this first by drawing in the air. Look at one object with your pencil in your hand, then draw it in the air as if you were drawing on paper, trying to let your hand follow your eye just as fast as it moves. Do this for a minute or so, keeping your eye and hand moving together. Now we'll try it on paper. It may feel strange to draw this way, but if you do it right, you'll find that you can tune in more to your eye movement and maybe notice things about the object you didn't see before. For the next drawing, add another bottle, laying it on the table pointing at you or away from you. Then draw the grouping without worrying about three-dimensional effects like the bottle on its side. Just concentrate on the shapes you see of the group, the individual bottles, and the negative space between them. But remember, this isn't an outline drawing. From the start, draw gesturally, even when making corrections. Remember how you drew the bottles in the last lesson. You drew quickly, like a gesture, but used logic to analyze the form into its component parts. Here the components are the front, back, side, top, and or bottom planes of the book or box. Seen from a different point, these angles become more acute or obtuse depending on how they're viewed. In drawing, these angles are called angles of recession, and we must measure each one carefully. Did you draw what you saw or what you know about the table? Did you draw the proportions as they actually are or foreshortened as they appear from your point of view? Now use sight measuring to really check the proportions depth to width. Then use the clock face to check the angles. Here we'll explore the two most common forms of perspective called one-point and two-point perspective, then study each one in depth in the following lessons. As a warm-up, however, we'll approach perspective in a more intuitive way with a super simplistic but surprisingly effective technique called the blob method. It's actually used by some interior designers when they start to plan out the design of a room. Like gesture drawing, the blob method starts out very light, loose, and quick, so it's easily changeable. And because everything is drawn basically at once, areas can easily be compared to each other and corrected if they're not accurate. For the next exercise, you'll develop one of the blob drawings further while correcting any errors. This process will be based both on observation and on applying the principles of perspective. We'll review these principles now. Diminution is the most familiar perspective principle. It's where objects appear increasingly smaller or diminished the further they get from the viewer. The principle of convergence is similar, but instead of objects getting smaller as they go back in space, it's the spaces between objects that get smaller. The receding railroad track and the view of a room you just drew are examples of what's called one-point perspective. That's where there's only one set of parallel lines going back in space. This happens when the viewer is facing a surface or space perpendicular to their line of sight, like the back wall of a room. Eye level is fixed at the actual height of the viewer's eye. From there, eye lines can change with every movement of the head or just the eyes. Eye level only changes when the head is actually elevated or lowered, like when the person moves to a higher or lower elevation. Now let's take the initial sketch to the next level by applying careful sight measuring techniques to it. Take note of this example, then go through each of the following steps on your own drawing. These steps will also be listed for you on the timing page. Hold up the viewfinder so it's facing the back wall. Use the top and bottom edges of the viewfinder to locate landmarks on the ceiling and floor of the hallway that correspond with the cropping of the picture. These red lines across the floor and ceiling show where key drawn lines stop inside the picture plane. Check the proportions of the back wall by comparing its height to its width. As in the sight measuring lesson, use your pencil held at arm's length to take the measurements. First, hold it vertically to measure the height of the back wall, then turn it horizontally to mark the width. The width of this wall is half its height, but for your wall, proportions may differ. While the center line remains a vertical line through the center of each ellipse, it's longer or shorter depending on where the ellipse is. Closer to eye level, it will be shorter, approaching a straight line. Further from eye level, it gets longer and longer, approaching but never quite reaching a circle. Stop. The final drawing for this lesson will take this subject further, setting a pile of books and/or boxes on the tabletop and drawing each object in perspective. Then we'll finish the drawing by adding shading and some surface planes. To help ground the objects, sketch in the shape of each object's shadow as it is cast on the surface. Draw light lines around the other value areas and number them based on comparing their value to the grayscale. The core shadow on the cube starts at the top of both of the side planes just where they meet the top plane. The darker of the two side planes gets darker where it meets the lighter plane. Notice that the dark tones of the core shadow and the darker areas of the cast shadow just below the objects make the lower surface of the objects appear slightly lighter than they did before. In any case, distortions are common among beginners until they study proportions. So we'll go through the proportions now while we demonstrate a constructionist approach to drawing the head and face. As you watch, sketch the basic steps and record the proportions in your sketchbook so you'll be able to apply them when you draw faces again. Again, keep these steps in mind as you begin the final portrait assignment. Before you start, we must add another point about proportions. We already said that these proportions vary somewhat from person to person, giving each face its unique characteristics. Equally important, these proportions only apply when looking at the head straight on and even with your eye level. Looking at the head from different angles, the center line changes and the receding features will be foreshortened. Looking at it from above or below, the face is foreshortened lengthwise so that the features crowd together and can even overlap. Ideally, the light should be placed above the head from the front and to one side. Then direct the light so it illuminates one side of the face more than the other. If the model's head or yours is tilted slightly up or down, the ears will be lower or higher relative to the eyes and the nose. Make any corrections needed before going on. Now you can begin to block in the general tones of dark and light. Squint to distinguish exact edges of light and dark areas using values to reveal large plane changes on the forehead, cheek, jaw, neck, etc. Then add smaller values around the eyes, mouth, and nose. Finally, look more carefully at these value areas and refine them, adding core shadows and cast shadows. Then use the kneaded eraser to add reflected light, soften shadow edges, and just clean up the drawing. Having followed these lessons, you have a new set of skills, both in drawing and observing. Continue to develop these skills and you'll find ways they'll apply to many things you do in life.